I'm Terry Doran. I'd like to welcome you to this very special first Sunday ever telecast here on Channel 10. We're live from the Allen County Public Library. You just saw a 59-minute documentary, Eagle Gone, that Wendy Watson and I produced. And now we hope you'll stay tuned for what we think will be a stimulating discussion with some very special guests who have traveled from different places in the state of Indiana to be with us. And I'm going to introduce them right now. I'm going to start here with Chief Walking Bear, who was in Eagle Gone, and Chief is from Frankton, Indiana, and with the Cherokee Alliance. Mr. Howard Laharu, Chief Shupsy, is from here in Fort Wayne, a Potawatomi. You saw the horrible thing that we did to the Potawatomi Indians in the Trail of Death in Eagle Gone. Howard makes his second appearance on Theater for Ideas. Shakape also makes her second appearance, plus being in Eagle Gone, and she's from Eaton, Indiana, and is a Miami, and is the granddaughter of the great Chief Manganza. Katrina Strauss is from Huntington, Indiana. Katrina is a direct descendant of one of the great Indians who ever lived, Little Turtle, and Chief Richardville, who many of you know has a house in Huntington that is being preserved. And Katrina, thank you for joining us on Theater for Ideas. And my very special friend, Mr. Dancing Feather Tom Ebbing from Fort Wayne, a Mohawk. And we have other guests here in the front row, Mr. Charles Redd, whom I've known for a long, long time, and in accepting my invitation to join us today, he said, still crazy? No, wait, it wasn't still crazy after all these years, still trying after all these years. It might be one and the same thing. Linda Marsh is also with the Cherokee Alliance. Mr. Pat Webb, you heard his voice, is the voice of Chief Seattle in Eagle Gone, and also his guitar music. Pat, thank you, from the Indianapolis area. Windsong helped prepare for this show. You saw her exhibit, those of you here, and thank you, Windsong. She's from Fort Wayne with the American Indian Council. And Gray Wolf, whose whole family is here, as he always travels with his family. One of our exhibitors is coming from the Bunker Hill area here in Indiana, also a member of the American Indian Council, doing beautiful, beautiful artwork. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to ask Dancing Feather to just begin with some comments as an Indian person to Eagle Gone and what it might mean to you, and then we'll open up the discussion to everybody.
Well, I would like to thank you, especially Terry and Wendy and all the people that had something to do with Eagle Gone. I'd like to especially thank you and Wendy for going to the Indian people and doing your interviews. A lot of times there have been things said about Indian people, and they are read from history books. It's in the school systems, and it's from a white man's perspective. Terry and Wendy have traveled all over the state of Indiana, and they have firsthand information from direct descendants from the Indian nations represented in Indiana. I thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Anybody else have anything you want to add to that as far as Eagle Gone or any of the issues raised in getting us started? If not, I'd like to read a quotation which I think is very pertinent to the discussion and the issues in Eagle Gone. It's from an editorial in the News Sentinel, which I want to thank the News Sentinel for a great article they did on Eagle Gone, but nonetheless, we're going to take issue with them here in their editorial. It says, quote, General Anthony Wayne, you will recall, won this territory not with firepower, but with a military tactic perfected by the Roman legions and passed down to him through written word and academic program. This was within the context of saying that the reason the Indians didn't do well with the Pilgrims because the Pilgrims had the history of Western civilization and the Indians didn't. I might remind everyone that the history of civilization brought us the Holocaust. It's bringing the destruction of the environment. It also has brought many great things. But the point of Eagle Gone for me is to kind of even the balance, to say that we, the Western tradition, don't have all the answers, and we better start paying attention to some other kind of traditions and culture. Charles, that maybe is a good point for you to come in because you've been working on helping the oppressed become visible and get justice for many years. Your comments?
Just in looking at Eagle Gone, I can recognize the similarities as well as the differences between the Afro-American culture and the Native American culture. I couldn't help but remember that the major difference between the two is that with the Native American culture, the white man took the land from them. With the Afro-American they were taken from the land. The differences and the likenesses tend to unite us throughout the years, my experiences with the Urban League, and listening to some of the puns that are being told about the Native American or any other ethnic group. And the thing is that America seems to have the capacity to create an internal enemy without help, without sustenance.
Thank you. Very well spoken. The second part I want to add to that is a quote about Little Turtle, keeping in mind what was said about Anthony Wayne, that Indians couldn't be brilliant military strategists. In Little Turtle, the Miami Indians and their allies had one of the most crafty military strategists ever produced on the North American continent. If Little Turtle had been a white man and a West Point graduate, his name would have gone down in history as one of America's most gifted leaders. As it was, his shrewd mind was more than a match for the top officers of the United States Army, proving that you don't have to know Roman warfare in order to be a great general. But I think that brings us the point about history and who really writes history. Howard, I know you're a great historian. Any comments on that? How's history is?
Two things where the New Sentinel was wrong. To begin with, Wayne did not use Roman tactics. If you look at the Roman form of tactic with the phalange and men holding their shields over their head and others holding it, in other words, the Roman square it was called. He didn't use that. He finally got smart after Little Turtle and others had destroyed Braddock's army and Labam's army and Hanna's army, or Harmer's army and so forth. They decided to use guerrilla tactics, the same thing that the American Indians employed. In fact, the matter, the American Rangers and so forth still use that very same tactic. The way to live off the land and be a part of the land, and so you're not sticking out there like Braddock's army did, outfitted in red coats that shone in the sunlight, and come marching down squares, the old Roman square, which made it ideal. They were sitting ducks as far as our people were concerned. So in that, they didn't. New Sentinel should do a lot of boning up before they write articles. They do the very same thing with our friend Charles here and his constituency, what he talks about in the city council and so forth. He's misquoted more times than he's quoted correctly. Now when it comes to Little Turtle, I, like Trina, share some of Little Turtle's family blood. Little Turtle was a brilliant man, and when they took him to Philadelphia, they showed him ships coming into the harbor, loaded with white Europeans and cannons and guns and produce from Europe and so forth. And he realized when he saw that they could bring shipload after shipload of people from Europe that wanted to get out of the slums and the horrible conditions in Europe here to America where there was free land. Much faster they could bring these ships across than native Miami Indian women could give birth to sons to replace those that fell in battle. It takes at least 16 to 18 years to make a warrior, and when they were bringing thousands of shiploads of people already full grown, there was no way that Indian armies could compete with that, and he saw that. And so he came back here to Indiana, what was Indiana now, and asked the people, the Indian people here, to follow him into the road of peace, because he had seen enough people murdered and killed and starved and sick with disease and sick with neglect and alcoholism and so forth. It wasn't bullets, it was these things I just mentioned that destroyed us. It was not bullets that led Charles Ribb's family over here, it was chains. It was chains that took Menominee, who was an honest man, to the west. He went in chains. And I had a great-great aunt who died on the way out from the Potawatomi's Trail of Tears. She fell out of the wagon, and the wagons ran over her, and they kept right on going. And the family was not allowed to stop long enough to bury that little child. It was about a 3-year-old child. And so the New Sentinel, which does a good job in many things, but it needs to brush up on history a little bit before it quotes these things.
I think there's a lot of publications, a lot of people that need to brush up on history. It's written from the side or point of view of those who are winning, and they have the power to control what we think of as history. I mean, for example, in Eagle Gone, I'm wondering if anyone in the audience would have any comment on this, what you think about a Fort Wayne street being named after a man who made a handsome profit by being part of the group that sold off the Potawatomi Indians that Mr. LaHaru was just talking about, and there's a street named after him. Therefore, from the victor's point of view, this was a great man. But I think from true history's point of view, there's nothing great about somebody taking a group of people by force in chains and having the kinds of things that Howard just mentioned happen. Does anybody have any comment on that?
There's a large element of our society, though, that still applauds such things. I mean, you know what I mean? There's enough racism, etc., that's still applauded.
Well, what would you sign a petition to change the name of Ewing Street? Let's get a petition going and change the name of Ewing Street. All right? We'll pass that around. Okay? That would be one tangible thing. It would make me very happy, and I thank all of our guests if we'd change that name. Yes, in the back. Well, could you move up just a little bit so we can hear you a little better? Thank you. Yes.
If you read the history books, here in America it says that Benedict Arnold was a traitor to our country, and Washington was the hero. But if you go to England, it's the very opposite. So it's according to who's writing the history books as to what's going to be written.
Very, very true. Very true. Chief, you're a leader of your people and one who works daily to try to correct some of these distortions. What kind of problems and what kind of response are you getting? I know you give a lot of talks and so forth.
Well, we get a great response from the children. They're all very interested in hearing the right side of the history instead of a one-sided effect that they get in their books. Because even today they still believe that we live in the same old houses that we used to, wear the same old clothes that we used to, and do some of the things that we used to do. Well, in some respects we do. Every chance we get, we try to go out there and show the public how we did live, and to teach our own children the traditions and the heritage that they are losing in the white man's society. Our purpose is to raise our children so that they know their background and not to be forced out like some of our people have been done. And we have great response of adults and the children alike, and also some of the government officials.
Terrific. And Katrina and Shakopee, how you do similar things for the Miami people. And you can't help but in looking at the show, following up on what Chief just said, some of the almost ridiculous notions that people still have. I mean, that you scalp people, Indian scalp people. In modern America, what's your, Katrina?
Working with the children like I do in the school systems, you often get the question about the scalping, and when you tell the children that it was not the Indians who started the scalping, they are surprised because they are not hearing the story from our people. That is one of the reasons why myself and Shakopee, I believe, go to the school and talk to the children, because reaching the children, reaching the people, such as a program today, is the reason for us being here, to teach the people what it was and what it is to be an Indian.
Terrific. Shakopee?
Well, that's what we're all after. We want to eradicate any myths that there are. We want a better understanding. So many words are so confusing in the English language. One word can have 10 different meanings. And the way the person phrases it will entirely change it. We need more compassion and understanding in our language, our communication. And I think that's what we're all after.
Absolutely. It's the one thing that separates us from our other friends on the earth, the animal and friends and bird friends, that we can speak. Of course, they have a very beautiful language too in many ways. Winsong, why does a young woman from Fort Wayne try to preserve a Indian heritage when we know how difficult it is, and we know you have to live, as the chief has said, in a white man's world? So why bother? What's your motivation?
We need to keep our heritage alive. It's important not for just us, but for our children, for the children to learn the correct ways, the way it really was. I agree with Shaka Pei and Katrina. It's more important for the children so that they have a decision to make when they get old enough to make that decision one way or the other.
Very good. Gray Wolf, I ask you the same question. And what response you get? I know you do a lot of speaking and a lot of exhibiting and
basically the same thing. We have a culture that is hundreds, thousands of years old. If we don't pass it on, it's going to die out. And my daughter went to school a couple years ago, and they told her that teepees were set up with 4 poles. And she tried to tell the teacher that she lives in one 9 months a year, and it has 18. And they told her how wrong she was. You know, she brought in pictures, it was wrong. So we have a job and a mission to go out, all of us, and to spread our culture and to correct some of the mistakes, some of the wrong things that were done, and pass it on to the children, because the children will be the leaders. And they'll be the ones that will go on.
Thank you. Pat, you come from a little different perspective. You're an artist, a musician. Why do you become involved in programs like Eagle Gone and with the American Indian? What's your motivation?
Well, when I was a child, not just Indians, Native Americans, but also black people helped raise me because I didn't have a father at that time since I was 4. I lived in a neighborhood where you could do that. I was born on the Kickapoo Prairie of Springfield, Missouri. And this is an opportunity for me to pay back by working on this film and getting this around some of the good that was done to me from the first. I knew there was a better way than the way a lot of white people lived and still do. This is I think the next decade's our last chance to turn these problems around. I think the Earth is screaming now from what we've done to it. I think it's time to change this. What I'm doing here, I feel honored to be involved, and I'm trying to pay back a little of what was given to me all these years.
Thank you. Linda might finish this line of questioning with your role in the Cherokee Alliance and what kinds of things you contribute.
Well, I'm not an officer or anything at this time, but I do go with Carl when he goes to the schools. And I worked at a daycare center for a little while. And after working there for about 2 weeks, one little boy asked me if I was going to kill him. He thought that all Indians, that's all they did, was set up people to kill them. And not only that, I'm going to college right now, and I was talking to a girl that is black, and she was telling me that another girl in the class asked her if she believed in intermarriage with black and white, and she told her, you know, whatever anybody felt that she thought they could do. And it's just really different because this girl thought that their kids would be half black and half white, but not in the same. She said that they would be half white from the waist up, half black from the waist down. Now this is college people, and if they have those types of beliefs, I think somebody better be teaching them something.
Charles?
A major problem, I think, that both nations are facing in America is how to remove the differences that have been created by traditional United States history. For example, what I'm referring to is that the majority culture, the majority civilization tends to use myths and stereotypes as positive social values, and they tend to connect with each other. And in order to reverse that, we have to be consistently and continuously rewriting history, both verbally and in language and music in any form that we possibly can. But we must also, at the same time, understand the traumatic effect that that's going to have on that group of people that have been passing it on from one generation to another generation. and I've just about run out of understanding.
Well, I think we heard Wapshing and Eaglegon say that we feel we're ordained from God or some higher power to do as we please, and it's that attitude that's doing us in, frankly. I mean, with the environment and the violence and all the different kinds of problems we have, and your point is good, that though to change these myths and this way of thinking is very threatening to the people who hold them. It's what I call the myth of innocence, which from a book called The Colonial Experience, written by Clarence Carson, it says, "This sense and knowledge of history provided the European settlers with an edge over the Indians. It endued them with an awareness of their place in the scheme of things. It gave vitality to their belief that they had a special purpose, a mission, and even a destiny." Well, we can turn that around and say it's that kind of sense of purpose, that sense of destiny, that manifest destiny, that's leading us all to the edge of the cliff here. You know, I mean, nobody has any more of a destiny than any other race or group of people. So let's go back to changing Ewing Street, Charles. You're a city councilman. What can we do? What's our step? What's our procedure?
Having had a little
That would be
experience.
tangible. Yeah, right. I know you have. I didn't tell you this before the show. I was afraid you wouldn't show up. So.
It depends on who it's going to benefit. But a very similar argument in my effort to change Lewis Street to Martin Luther King Street, we can expect a similar reaction from those people who make up the majority of any group. All it requires is a petition or a number of signatures or people stating an interest in changing a street name, and then to find a member of council who I'll volunteer to introduce an ordinance that would bring about the change. There would be some study requirement by the traffic engineering department. Costs would be determined by changing the name of the street sign. The county commissioners, the highway departments, and those kinds of things have to be cleared. It's not difficult, but just a reminder to those who don't pick Union Street, I guarantee you there will be someone in Fort Wayne, Allen County that would have a reason to keep Union Street.
I'm sure, yes. But could viewers call you or write to you if they want to participate in this? Because I would really like one tangible thing to come about as Eagle Gone in this discussion, and that would be I think that would be the tangible thing. So if you're interested, call Mr. Charles Redd, and then we'll see what we can do. Well, all right. Or you can call me, but he knows the ropes better than I do. Okay, let's get some comments. Yes, sir.
My wife and I are visitors from England, and we notice particularly that when we go round looking for historical facts, particularly about the Indian races and tribes, that it's very difficult to find them. In Fort Wayne, for instance, there is a fort built almost in honor of the American forces, and in a very insignificant light shows a small compound which was allotted to the Indian serfs. Now, if we want to enhance the feelings of the group of Indians here tonight, I think more emphasis should be put in a reverse sort of way. And we have actually gone to Canada on several occasions, and we find there the Indians are much more in the public eye, in as much as there are museums, there are places where one can buy gifts. Admittedly, the reservations which are allotted are sacrosanct. We're not allowed to visit them unless we're accompanied, and I think these should be opened up so that visitors can get a good insight into the way of the American life, the Indian life.
Great, very good. Well, that brings us to the fort in Fort Wayne. I guess we change Ewing Street. We could work on changing the name of the city, but we'll get Ewing Street first. Ewing Street first, then the name of the city. But it's a very good point. Thank you very much for your comment. Yes.
I have a question. A statement was made that you could not get federal funds being an Indian, such as Homebound Meals and Food Bank, and I wondered where you ever got that idea. That statement was made on there that you couldn't get federal funds such as food banks.
Said, you mean there?
Yeah, it was Ray White, I think, on Eagle Gone made that.
The United States government makes a lot of mistakes. And one of the things it makes is the duplication of services to people. In other words, in the Indian Bureau, which would then come through recognition, would come the interference in your life from the Indian Bureau, really to say it correctly. Then they have an Indian Bureau of Health. The United States government's already got a Bureau of Health for everybody, every citizen, black, white, red, green, pink, or what color they are. And so you don't need all that. The real thing that Ray kind of got off the subject a little bit there in his speech. Ray was right, but he was wrong. All federal programs practically that you can name are open to everybody.
That's right.
If you're eligible because of poverty or you're eligible because of any one of a million different things, they're open to everybody, and so Indians can participate that way. The thing that he was talking about, and the very thing that the United States government makes a liar out of itself, the Miamis were recognized in court that they had a claim against the United States government and have been paid at least twice now on these claims. Yet the federal law says that if you claim to be an Indian and receive money fraudulently, it's a $5,000 offense and I think 5 years in jail or something of that sort. Now here the federal government on the one hand paid these ladies right here and their families federal monies as Miami Indians who were claimants in this lawsuit. Yet at the same time they say they don't recognize them. Well, if they don't recognize them, then the United States government broke its own laws by paying people who aren't Indians. And if they say, well, they're Indians enough to receive the check, then they're Indians enough to receive everything else. This is the incongruity of the way the United States government acts. This is why Ray was somewhat confused in his statement. It's the same thing with everything else. You can look at income taxes or anything else. The poor people that can hardly afford to pay the income taxes are paying it. The people that makes millions of dollars a year, big corporations and so forth, pay no taxes whatever. The federal government thinks that's fine. Yet they'd put you and me in jail if we didn't pay ours. And Indians pay income tax. I paid income tax all my life, and now I'm on pension, I'm still going to pay income taxes. These are the things that confuse people and confused Ray, and to answer your question. And Ray was wrong in that statement. Every federal program is open to all the citizens of the United States, and American Indians certainly are citizens.
I thought perhaps the statement he was going to make was that the Miami are not recognized as a tribe by the federal government.
They're not on the one hand, but they are on the other. Yeah. They received federal monies as Indians who were claimants in a lawsuit and who won the lawsuit. And so by their own law, they're breaking their own laws or they're being silly one way or the other.
Let me thank you. I'm going to pick up on your comment about the fort by reading another quotation. It's by James Riley, who is a non-Indian, a white man, on life at Fort Wayne in 1820. He said, quote, "The savages themselves are the most Christianized and least savage of the two classes now congregated here. Here the whites set example to the Indians too indelicate to mention, and that cannot fail to produce in their minds disgust for the American character," kind of setting the record straight with the old fort. So thank you again for your comment. Dancing Feather, this quote is about Christianity, and I don't think there's any one single area where the stereotype hits harder than Indians are savages. And I know that you do a lot of speaking about religion, the spirituality of the American Indian. Would you want to pick up on that, please?
Yes, I can tell you about Christianity and how the Indians perceived as Christianity is that one time speaking to a church group just outside of Fort Wayne, I had many artifacts with me, and one of the items I had was a fan and some dance sticks and such as that. And one of the dance sticks that I had was effigy of a snake. And I was talking to children, and by By the way, I'd never forgiven Shepsy quite for that because I was filling in for him. He was ill at the time, and we were not very well received. Just kidding you. But anyhow, I had this snake stick, which is a dance stick to me, and I could notice some adults in the audience looking very hard at me. The children enjoyed the program and enjoyed the different things that they were shown, and when I finished, I asked if there was any questions, and one of the ladies said, "Why do you have that snake stick?" Because that is the sign of the devil. And I said, to us, it is not a sign of a devil because we respect all of God's creation. And although I don't care to go out and play with snakes or pick them up, I'm going to give them a wide, wide berth, believe me, if I'm out in the woods. I still respect that snake as part of God's creation, and he was there first. So the stick, as I explained to her and like to explain to the people, is part of that creation, and it is to honor all the things that lives on the earth. That's just one example. The same thing as the fan or the feathers is to honor all the wingeds. We're all related.
Thank you. Katrina or Shakape or both, pick up a little bit about federal recognition for your people. As we're talking about tangible things. This is the one thing happening, not the only thing, but one of the big things here in the state of Indiana for the American Indian. Can you explain a little bit about what federal recognition is and when you expect to hear what the decision might be?
Well, it means quite a few things, and the most thing that I'm concerned with, again, is you come right back around to the children again, and that's the education of them. We have to educate our own as well as educating other people's children. Federal recognition is going to mean a lot of other things, health and welfare, things that most people are already taking for granted.
Katrina?
Yes, I'd like to make a comment of the woman's question earlier. The reason we do not have federal recognition now, I'm not very good with dates, but at a certain time, a government official stated that since our people that are still here in Indiana did not move west when our people were removed from this area, we were no longer considered Indian because we were not moved to the reservation. That is why we are not federally recognized in the aspect of getting the things that the people on the reservation get, such as medical, schooling benefits, and things like that. So it's from a statement of a man that was made back at the time of the removal.
So it was kind of a spiteful thing, right? And
yes, because we were not with the people on the reservation where Indians were to be put.
Right, you didn't do as you were told. What? And when do you expect to hear from the federal government as to what the status is? Isn't it by February of next year that they've promised to let you know or have to let you know?
Maybe. We've heard that before.
Okay.
They waited 100 years to get their treaty money, so...
Don't hold your breath, in other words. Okay.
It is on the congressional floor at this time, yes.
Okay. Yes.
I don't understand when white man would give you things and then they would want to receive something for it.
You mean why the white man took things and didn't give things back to the Indians? Is that what you mean? Is that, I don't want to put words, I mean, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, the Native Americans, when we were brought up, when a gift was given to you, now when somebody would come up and they would give you something, that was a gift. Okay, when the white traders came down, we would receive things from them, beads, metal objects that we did not have the metals for. And we thought this was a gift. And then when our payments would come around from the white people, they were expected us to pay for these things, which we thought were gifts. When the money ran out, when we have spent all our money and they had still given us things that we owed them for, then they in turn took our land and other things. The Indians looked at it as a gift.
In other words, it was a communication problem again.
Well, and also, I mean, when we took things and didn't give you anything back, it was in this spirit of manifest destiny that we were the higher ordained by a higher calling and you weren't, so it was justified. You know, the means justify the end kind of thing. That's kind of complicated. Did you want to say something else? Well, thank you for that question. That was a really good question. Thank you. Anybody else have anything you'd like to ask or add to the discussion? Yes.
There was a piece of legislation that would make it a misdemeanor to desecrate any Indian burial grounds or sites. The legislation did not pass in Indiana, and it wouldn't have been much of a deterrent because all that Indian material, pottery, whatever, is worth far more than $50 misdemeanor fee. It should be, the piece should be entered making that a felony, desecration of Indian burial grounds. Also, I want to mention that the Shoshone tribe in Nevada is now gathering legal assistance and so forth together because part of their burial ground is located on the Nevada test site where nuclear weapons are tested underground. And so there's a lot of uproar in that way. We definitely need all kinds of legislation to protect the sacred ground of the Indians, the Native Americans.
Thank you very much for that comment. And
part of December, the legislature is being put back in by one of the representatives. So
Yeah, I've rewrote that same bill twice. We've tried, this will be the fourth time now that we've tried to further throw some light on this, and I think a lot of people in America are a little bit confused as to when we say sacred sites and so forth, what we're talking about. These are sacred spots in nature. They're not man-made spots. In other words, it can be a beautiful lake, a beautiful valley. Certainly one of the most beautiful parts of Indiana and very sacred to the Miamis and has been for hundreds of years is the Wabash River itself. Now, that doesn't mean we want to restrict everybody else from going down and enjoying the beauty of the Wabash Valley. Far from it. What we want to have is the opportunity to go there ourselves without having to buy a ticket from the state of Indiana to get onto one of the reservoirs down there or something of that sort, which incidentally the reservoirs covered a great deal of Miami burial grounds and old Miami cities. But rather that, for instance, here in the state of Indiana, an American Indian has to buy a license to hunt and fish. The treaties say that we were given the right to hunt and fish forever, perpetuity, forever, on the land that was ceded to the white man. That land was ceded, and the treaty says that they have a right. Yet hundreds of my Miami Indian friends have been thrown in jail because they either kept a live raccoon or they had a pigeon or they had something that the Bureau said they shouldn't have, and they were thrown in jail over it. And they need the right to hunt and fish here. Many of these people are below the poverty level. Many of them, as is stated in the Eagle Gone, some 17% are out of work. Now, I don't mean that they should break the laws in the sense that they should kill deer out of season or something of that sort. That isn't what we're talking about. These people wouldn't do it anyway because they love the wild things and they would only use them for sustenance. But look how nice it would be if they could go and fish for their supper in the Wabash River. Now, as to burial things and things of that sort, we do not object to you going down and admiring the mounds. What we object to is the desecration of the mounds and the destruction of it. When you dig in a mound that's covered with sod, it isn't very long till it's eroded and gone. The pot hunters want the freedom to go in there and dig up the pots. They don't care anything about any sacredness or anything else. They want to sell it. There's a man in northern Indiana, his name is Lynn Munger. He runs the Potawatomi Museum, which is not a museum, and he's not an Indian. He buys and sells this stuff from the kids that he hires, the farm kids, to go out and dig it up. He buys and sells it. You go up there today and he's got a truckload of Hopi pottery, and next week you go up there and he's got a different truckload of something else because it's a saleable item. He sells it. An Indian body, the skeleton, the bones, put together and sold to a medical college would bring about $875. Indiana University has got a whole basement full, and I think Ball State has something like 700 and some Indian bodies that they've had out of the ground for over 100 years. They claim they're studying them. But the boxes are, you can go down and see them. The seams on the boxes are falling apart, and the contents is being all intermixed because it's all falling on the floor. American Indians would not object to taking a bone biopsy. They can take a bone or a skin biopsy or even your hair and tell you what you had for supper 10 years ago and whether you've been poisoned with something and all kinds of things. They don't need a whole skeleton, and they certainly don't need 700 to determine what Indians died of. Those that were at Wounded Knee and places like that died of bullets. They had lead poisoning. The thing we're trying to say is this: the world is a home for all of us. After an Indian's body has been buried for 10,000 years, as some of them have right here in Indiana, I could no longer say that was my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. No way, shape, or form. They belong to all of us now. The mounds belong to all of us. Who would think of going over and trying to blow up the pyramids? Who would think about trying to blow up the Great Wall of China? Who would think of tearing up all of Beethoven's symphonies and burning them? The world would be robbed of something. It's part of it's part of the total world heritage. This is what we're talking about. We're not saying that these are bad people, good people, or anything of that sort. What we're saying is, let us preserve some of these things for the future so that our great-grandchildren can go down and enjoy these same mounds or the same Great Wall of China or whatever. I'm just as happy about the Great Wall of China or the pyramids. I know none of my ancestors built either one of them, but I'm happy and proud that somebody did. I'm proud of Beethoven's symphonies. I can't write them, but I'm proud to listen to them and glad somebody did.
Well, what's the status now of the bill?
It's in committee right now.
It's in committee, so if it's passed, it would be a felony to...
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
Depends on what conditions they put on after.
Yeah,
it gets through all the committees.
There's no law right now whatsoever.
Most laws that cover
you.
it right now is if you want to dig in a grave, if it has a marker on it, you can't mark, or you can't dig in it. That mound, or anything that is sacred to the Native American, is a marker on that grave, but they don't recognize it unless it's a stone chipped out or something like that. That's a marker to them. But if it doesn't have a marker on it, they can dig in anybody's grave, including yours.
Incidentally, anybody that dies in the state of Indiana and is buried for 100 years, the grave belongs to the state of Indiana. It no longer belongs to the family under current law. What we're trying to do is not preserve just Indian graves. You know that they have dug up Abraham Lincoln, they've dug up Washington, they've dug up all these men that you think are heroes, the general public does. They've already done that. Roger Williams' grave they dug up. He was one of the founders, as many of you probably know, in the Virginia colony area. What we're trying to do is, in that bill, it says you cannot desecrate a church. In other words, you can't smear a red swastika on a Jewish synagogue. That's what we're also saying in that same bill. It's not just Indian things. We've got to stop and look and see what we're doing to our own culture. The whole world is our culture.
We're all in this together, and that's the whole point. I mean, we're all going to go under together. You know, which brings up, getting back to your question, and you mentioned nuclear sites, that there was a headline not too long ago saying that the United States government has lied to us, its own people, about nuclear sites and the damaging effect. And I think it's part of that whole sense of history and that we're talking about, that if you do something like we did to the American Indian, you probably do it to ourselves, and that seems to be the case. I mean, you do what is needed to perpetuate whatever goal you want and whatever means it takes to achieve it. And you know, our new president, or about to be president, George Bush, was comparing himself with Martin Van Buren. You may have noticed in Eagle Gone, the treaty, one of the treaties had his signature, and Martin on the Trail of Death, the Potawatomi, that he signed, and he knowingly signed fraudulent treaties. So that's somebody good to compare yourself to, yes. You come out here, Gandalf. I can't get to you. Thank you.
Some of us were talking about, from a white person's perspective, about what kind of national legislation we could possibly do to somewhat redress the Indian problem. And the thing that we came up with that would be the best would be to essentially make the national park system an Indian-run affair, so that everyone who worked for the national park system would have to be an Indian, which would provide a lot of employment. It would provide them with the special sites and access to the special sites that they truly deserve. It would still give the same access to the white people, but they could have places for their own villages in those places or whatever, and people could really see how they were living in really proper sites or whatever, and it would be a greater enrichment for everyone, it seems, and especially give a labor force to the American Indian that might be very useful at this particular point.
I'm going to nominate you to Mr. Bush to appoint you Secretary of Interior.
Thank you.
No, it's a very good idea. Anybody want to follow up on that? He wants to
I like a job.
You want a job? Okay.
Let me say just one thing. I think we need to address just one more item here, just a minute. We have to be very, very careful in making legislation of any kind that specifically says it's just for Germans, just for Chinese, just for Japanese, just for Negroes, just for Indians, just for this, just for that. What we do when we do that is build a wall between that individual and everybody else. Let me explain just one or two things real quickly here. I was in the Second World War as a volunteer, and I'm a veteran and so forth, and as you heard, we paid with 30,000 of our lives and so forth. I'm very proud of that. I'm not a bit ashamed of the fact I served in the American Army. What I'm saying is this, though: when my buddies were wounded and were bleeding to death on that battlefield, they didn't care a hoot. Whether a black man or a white man or a green man or a little man from Mars donated the blood plasma that saved their life. That's all they wanted was, medic, where's the blood? That's the first thing. And a few years ago, Wag asked my son if he was a full-blooded Indian. He said no, he just got back from the blood bank and he was about a quart low. We are all human beings. Every race here in North America who has an ethnic background here or whatever is going to have members of their families die of AIDS. And it isn't going, the AIDS germ doesn't say, are you black or white before it kills you? It doesn't say, are you an American Indian and above AIDS? It don't say that. We're going to have to come down and realize that the thing that hurts Charlie's children, my children, and your children hurts all of us. When we start telling these stories, let us tell the truth. Whether we're telling it to a black child, to a white child, to a red child, or what. That's the important thing. That's what we're going to have to come down to. It does not, starvation, poverty, and I'm sure people here can tell me, agree with me, has no racial lines. There's people, white people in poverty and black and red in poverty. What we need to do is get rid of the poverty.
Absolutely.
Or the things that cause it.
The only statement I wanted to make is I think you people are trying to be more Indian than the people on the reservation are right now at this time. The last time we were out there, the parents said the young people don't care to dance anymore and do those things, so what's going to carry it on?
I'd like to comment on something about that. When you live on a reservation, an Indian group of people, and white people come in, you're degraded. You are told not to be Indian, not to say that you are Indian, even though they most likely can tell you are Indian. Here in the state of Indiana, it's a proud thing to be an Indian. A white person will say, oh, you're Indian. Here. But you go to a reservation and the Indians will want to hide it. They will not show as much. It's the proudness after being degraded for so long, being told that being an Indian is wrong, that you were savage. Just like any person who is constantly degraded, it brings you down to the point where you don't want to do traditional things.
But I think on a lot of reservations, there's a sense of trying to get back in touch with that heritage. And sir, I'll be right to you, but I'll pick this lady's question up.
I had two questions, well, one question and a comment. First of all, you say you come into the schools. I'd like to know how, you would get you to come into the schools, whether you come into Fort Wayne Community Schools or any schools. And not only, I was reading in the library that this Western civilization goes to the Himalayans, they're huge, humongous, and they're garbaging them up too. And it just, it just seems like money and power take over everything, and tradition is gone. And I've got to thinking, we celebrate Thanksgiving, but there isn't that much tradition in our family that holds us together. And, other than our love for one another, I think it's time that we try to love each other as people and, recognize each culture that's in this world brings something beautiful. And not everybody's right. They all have their point of view. But just to try to, love one another and to try to understand. And I don't know, maybe that, but just the school, to help these kids, realize that it's time, to stop, that we don't need all the materialistic things, that you don't have to get high on drugs, you don't have to get high on alcohol, you can get high on a beautiful sunset or a smile on a person's face. Man, that's all I have to say.
That's a lot. Thank you. It's beautiful. Thank you.
I had quite a bit of experience with the children from the Sioux Reservation in South Dakota, and I found that they are more or less brainwashed in the fact that if you ask them something about South Dakota, they think white. They think like we do. If you ask them Lakota, then they think Indian. And we had an interesting experience one night. We were watching one of the early American battles on TV, and cavalryman was sitting there, and this Indian was stealthily creeping up on him. Little Indian girl sitting beside me, she jumped up, she said, "Kill that Indian, kill that Indian." And she got so wrapped up in the picture that she forgot where she was. But I found when you ask them something, if you ask them in Lakota, you get the Indian version. If you say South Dakota, you get the white man's version. It's just something that you can't get around.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have about 5 minutes left. Time for a few more questions or comments from our audience. Somebody like to follow up on anything that's being said here? Yes, sir.
What's the current status of our school curriculum with regards to history teaching and American Indians and the culture now? I haven't heard anybody say that.
We have about a paragraph and a half, maybe. Sometimes they get a few more than that, but usually it's about, if you're lucky, you might have a half a page.
Then what efforts are being extended to change that curriculum?
As far as the school board does, I have no idea. That's the reason we go into the schools. A lot of the educators recognize that there isn't enough put in print, not enough research or anything else, and that's the reason a lot of them call us and ask us to come in.
I think another thing, too, is the fact that in American history, somebody way back in 1816 said something, and everybody else copies just exactly what they said, rather than coming and trying to find out new information on themselves or for themselves. We had Helen Tanner here at one program, and she had a tremendous time trying to find people who would talk to her about the current viewpoint rather than taking somebody's viewpoint from 1816. It's been quoted. If you go down here to the bookstore, and you buy books on Indians, quote unquote, they're all exactly alike, except the pages have different pictures. They move the pictures around on the pages so they look different and will sell, but they're no different.
Thank you.
A comment on that, on the education and getting it into the schools. We have volunteered to help the state of Indiana do these things.
Everybody here on this platform has.
Is there any effort to continue your language, the Indian language?
Yes.
Yes, we're
the Cherokee language. We do have a computerized version of it. We're getting modern too, which is in 48 colleges right now over the United States, and we have made up the program ourselves that you can type on a regular keyboard, and when it comes out on the screen or on the paper, it is in the Cherokee language.
Thank you, Chief.
Yeah, Terry, first of all, I'd like to say you did a real good job on this show. And I think generally speaking, I think all of us would have a consensus that what we've done to the Indians as a government, is really bad. And it's time to move forward and thinking that we're all individuals and that tradition is good, but maybe it's time to come forth and start creating our own new worlds. And, our biggest government, the military establishment is the biggest business in this country, and it is proven to be a bad thing. I mean, we've killed and killed, we've raped the land, we've destroyed the sea, we've polluted the air, and I think we have consensus that all of us want to see things move forward away from our history. And as long as we still keep and I don't mean to step on any toes, but as long as we still keep clinging on to the past, both in religions, both in culture and tradition, without setting up new ideals for ourselves as a civilization, as individuals, we won't make any more new progress. And it's time to move forward. And this is a good day to air this because Carl Sagan had a thing in the paper about moving on and addressing our president that we must, rectify and clear up our atmosphere in the land that we live on.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you. Dancing Feather? Go ahead.
I'd just like to make a comment that I agree with the gentleman that just spoke, but we are none of us talking here about the past. We're talking about present day. The desecration of the graves is present day. The prejudice against our faith and our practices is present day. The prejudices against the school system and children in school. There's a lady in this audience could not get her child admitted to a school because she's American Eskimo. The prejudices are not in the past, they're present day.
Okay, we're just about out of time. I think what we can do, there's still people wanting to ask some questions. I'm going to wrap up for our television audience, and we'll continue with the discussion for a few more minutes so viewers can stay tuned. Thank you all for watching. Call Mr. Charles Redd to change the name of Ewing Street, or me, Terry Doran. And I want to thank the News Sentinel, the Journal Gazette, Channel 15, WANE TV, and Magic Radio. They've all been here and they've helped to change some of these distortions, and we appreciate it. That's the way it's going to happen with the media cooperating with all of us. Thank you all for watching. Thank you, audience, and especially the Eagle Gone friends and Charles Redd. Thank you.